If you look at Chipper and Sons Lumber Co., the story of the game is actually more interesting when you consider both the in-game narrative and the real-world story behind its creation. The game itself tells a simple, cheerful story about a family lumber business in a forest full of talking animals. Who would have guessed? But behind the scenes, it also represents a turning point in the career of the creator, Scott Cawthon. When you start Chipper and Sons Lumber Co., the game introduces you to a place called Beaver Forest. This world is colorful and cartoonish, almost like something from a children's TV show. The environment is full of bright trees, strange mushrooms, and small animal characters who all live together in a peaceful woodland society. Instead of humans, every character is an anthropomorphic animal that walks, talks, and runs a small business. The story begins with the player controlling Tyke, a young beaver who is just starting his first day working for his father's company. His father, Mr. Chipper, runs a lumber mill that sits at the center of the forest. From the very beginning, the game frames the story as kind of coming-of-age adventure. Tyke is learning the family trade, and the player is basically experiencing the process of growing up and taking responsibility. Mr. Chipper acts both as boss and the mentor throughout the game. When Tyke first arrives, he is given simple tasks that teach him how to do the lumber business. These tasks form the foundation of the gameplay. You plant trees, wait for them to grow, chop them down, and then bring the logs back to the lumber mill so they can be turned into usable wood. The entire system revolves around collecting resources and using them to build new things. At first, the game feels extremely small and simple. You start with only a few trees and very limited equipment. But as Tyke continues working, the lumber company slowly grows. New blueprints become available, allowing the player to construct different machines and structures. Some of these items are decorative, like totem poles or small buildings, while others serve functional purpose by helping the player gather resources more efficiently. Eventually, you can even create automated helpers, known as lumberbots, small robotic machines that chop trees and gather lumber for you, even when you're not actively playing. The forest itself is also full of other characters who provide small side stories. Different animals offer Tyke tasks or mini-games in exchange for rewards. One character might challenge you to a jumping puzzle across floating platforms. Another might ask you to search for hidden items buried in the forest floor. These small activities give the world a sense of personality and make the forest feel like a living community rather than just a resource gathering map. What's interesting about the writing is that it occasionally slips into strange humor. The dialogue between characters often contains weird jokes or oddly dramatic lines that feel slightly out of place in such a cheerful world. Sometimes Mr. Chipper speaks with exaggerated seriousness about the lumber business, as if running a sawmill is the most important mission in the world. Other characters make comments about the forest mysteries, termites stealing things, or bizarre competitions between animals. These moments don't really create a deep story, but they give a game a quirky personality. In terms of narrative structure, the game doesn't have a traditional plot with rising tensions or a final villain. Instead, the story, if you can call it that, is really about progress and growth. Tyke begins as an inexperienced worker and slowly becomes capable of running larger and more complex operations. By unlocking new blueprints and expanding the company, the player is essentially watching the family business evolve. The goal isn't to defeat an enemy or solve a mystery. The goal is simply to build something bigger than what you started with. However, the real reason people still talk about the story of Chipper's Sons Lumber Co. today has very little to do with what happens inside the game itself. The real story is what happens when the game was released. When Scott Cawthon launched the game in 2013, he'd hoped it would be another small success in his long career of indie development. Before this point, he had created already small games and animated projects, but none of them had any major popularity. Chipper and Sons was designed as a light-hearted management game that might appeal to casual players. Instead, the game received a lot of criticism online. Many players focused on the character models, especially the design of Mr. Chipper, and the other animal characters. Instead of looking cute and friendly, people said the characters looked stiff and unnatural. The eyes wide and frozen smiles gave them an eerie appearance. Some reviewers even said they looked like animatronic mascots from a theme restaurant, which created an uncomfortable, uncanny valley feeling. For Cawthon, this criticism was extremely discouraging. At the time, he had spent years trying to build a career as a game developer with very little financial success. Seeing people mock the design of his characters made him feel like he had failed. According to later interviews and articles, the negative response to Chipper & Sons Lumber Co. left him deeply depressed and unsure if he should continue making games at all. But instead of quitting, he decided to turn the criticism into an idea. If people thought the characters looked like creepy animatronics, then maybe he could intentionally create a game about creepy animatronics. That thought eventually became the foundation for Five Nights at Freddy's, which he began developing shortly afterward. The horror game used mechanical mascots with wide eyes and stiff movements, the exact qualities people had criticized in Chipper & Sons. That thing that was considered a flaw suddenly became the central feature of a horror experience. The success of Five Nights at Freddy's completely changed Cawthon's career. The game exploded in popularity on YouTube, especially through Let's Plays by popular creators. Within months, it had turned into one of the most recognizable indie horror games in the world. And because of that success, people later looked back at Chipper & Sons Lumber Co. with a different perspective. Instead of seeing it as just another obscure mobile game, fans began calling it an accidental origin story of the entire Five Nights at Freddy's franchise. Even years later, Cawthon occasionally referenced the game in his newer projects. The character Mr. Chipper appears as a boss in FNAF World, almost as a humorous nod to his earlier work. In a way, it feels like the developer acknowledging where everything started. So when you look at Chipper & Sons Lumber Co. today, the story exists on two levels. Inside the game, it's a simple tale about a young beaver helping his father run a lumber company in a friendly forest. It's about planting trees, building machines, and helping a community grow. But outside the game, it's a story of a struggling developer who turned criticism into inspiration and accidentally created one of the most famous horror franchises in gaming history. And that might be one of the most interesting stories that I have stumbled upon, the development of Chipper & Sons. I hope you enjoyed this video. Leave a like, of course, if you did. Don't forget to subscribe. It always helps my channel out. Yeah, I hope I see you in the next video. Goodbye.